familiar with these three rock and roll icons. It was back in the 50s, and Buddy Holly was a great, and so was Ritchie Valens, and so was the Big Bopper. And if you have not heard them, look it up and listen to their songs, because they're fun, and they just make you want to dance. But unfortunately, February 2nd, 1959, was considered the day the music died, because not only did those three music legends perish in a plane crash, but so did a young 21-year-old pilot, Roger Peterson. So this all take place, well, the problem started really back when Buddy Holly had found out that his manager was stealing from him, and he had to fire him, and he was left with a new bride who was pregnant and no money. So he signed with a company that signed on with General Artist Corporation, GAC, and they demanded that he go on a winter dance party tour with him and his band, and then Ritchie Valens and the Big Bopper kind of all got involved, because it was like a big event, a big venue with all these great singers. The problem is that when Buddy Holly had agreed to do this, it was not very well thought out, because it started January 23rd, and they were supposed to go for 24 days in 24 different cities. And it was not in a circular, city by city, go to the closest next city. No. What happened was some genius put together this venue of hopping from city to city in the northeast west, kind of in the middle. And sometimes they would have to go 500 plus miles to get to the next venue. So they would be driving all night long, which wouldn't be so terrible in brand new, tour buses, right? That had heat. They were actually in old school buses that didn't allow even children in them anymore. So here's these musicians that had to carry all their expensive equipment from city to city, sometimes going 500 plus miles a night, spending 10 to 12 hours on the road. They were getting frostbitten. They were getting the flu. It was just by the 11th day, Buddy Holly was so frustrated and tired. He said, look, he pulled everybody in and said, look, we're making the money. What I'm gonna do is I've chartered this plane, this Beechcraft Bonanza, out of the airport, and we're gonna fly ahead of everybody, and we're gonna meet them there, but we're gonna get some rest. So, the problem is, only 3 of us can go. The flight cost $37. And Dion Ed, which is one of the singers, had said, look, that's what my parents paid for my childhood, and there's no way. He just couldn't justify, spending that much money just to fly for his own luxury. So he actually passed up the opportunity to go on the plane and get some rest, which was much needed, because you see, these musicians not only were traveling to city, but they didn't have any help actually loading and unloading their equipment. So I all over the northwest United States in the middle of winter when the lowest, it was 36 degrees Fahrenheit and 30 degrees Celsius. And at the warmest, it was 20 degrees Fahrenheit and 7 or 8 degrees Celsius, with the snow waist deep most of the time, sometimes knee deep. But you also remember that back in the late 50s, most of the main highways were not built yet. So they had to travel all of these miles on these back roads, like these tiny 2-lane roads that go up and down mountains, and just in all this horrible weather. Like, it got so cold and so bad, one of the buses actually just stalled in the middle of the highway. They did get another bus, but it just, standing out in sub-zero weather was just really, really wearing on the musicians, obviously. I mean, would anybody? No, they felt they had not a single day of rest in 24 days in that kind of conditions. They had horrible, they were getting frostbitten, they were getting the flu. So Buddy Holly goes ahead and he charters this plane and says, okay, look, we're the singers, we need our rest, our voices, yada yada. So it's $37, and apparently Ritchie Valens had flipped a coin for his seat, and that was with Dion, and Dion said he just couldn't justify the $37 because that's what his parents paid for his childhood apartment, which is completely respectable, actually. I'm gonna pass. Despite the Big Bopper being afraid to fly, he actually had the flu, so he exchanged places with another singer, whose name eludes me at the moment. And they're heading to North Dakota, Fargo, North Dakota, which they had storms constantly in the winter. Well, as these three get on this plane, bored, but he said, well, I hope you don't freeze to death in the bus. The other guy said, well, I hope you don't, in your plane, which he had to live with for the rest of his life, to have joked about, and then it actually came true. Flying out of Dwyer Airport, which Mr. Dwyer owned that airport, or his family, from 1930 to 2016. The pilot, Roger Peterson, had 711 flying hours, which is a decent amount of time. He did have 28 flying hours in the Beechcraft Bonanza that they were going to fly in. However, 9 months prior to that, he had actually failed his in-flight checkpoint. So that was not good. He was not qualified to fly in anything that he could not visibly, navigate. He did not have his instrument reading. So here we are again with another pilot that does not have his instrument reading. When you mix bad weather with a pilot who is not qualified, so many things could go wrong. You have no idea. My father was a pilot for 50 plus years, and I can't tell you how many times he has said to me, 90% of small craft crashes are due to pilot error. He says because there is no reason a pilot should make a bad decision. And it's true. Peterson. They take off, and his weather reports that the winds are about 30 knots, 25 knots. The visibility is 15 miles plus. And the ceiling is 6,000 feet with fairly, just mild overcast, pretty good visibility, 15 miles. I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna get up there. It's just lightly snowing, but actually the conditions, for some reason, which did not reach Peterson and should have been not only gotten to him, but highlighted to warn the pilot of these conditions who did not have the capacity or the skills to fly in such weather. They were actually a ceiling of 3,000 feet, visibility of 6 miles, with winds of 30 knots, but gusts up to 30 knots. So that's a different story altogether. Completely. Well, let's talk about the plane. That plane was an older version and was also equipped with instruments that were not what he was even trained on. And he was actually trained on the, imaginary horizon. So you can actually see the plane rising or going lower. That's what he was trained on. But this plane was a gyroscope. It was actually opposite of what the, artificial horizon would show. So it worked just a little bit different, and he didn't know if he couldn't pass what he had been trained on. I don't think, and this is just a guess, I don't know, I don't think he would have known how to navigate a Sperry F3 gyroscope, which was completely the opposite of what he had known. And it didn't appear to be that bad. Obviously, I don't think this pilot would have taken off. He was, had quite a few flying hours, and he lived in Iowa, so he was familiar with he'd been flying for 5 years, and he had been flying a year with Dwyer, so he knew what the conditions would be like in the winter, and he probably knew better. However, the report looked good, and he did not get the second report with the extreme difference in conditions. So they take off. He kind of watched them take off, and at 800 feet, they made a 180-degree turn to the left, and then, for some reason, made another turn to the left, and slowly descended downwards until the taillights could not be seen. That was 5 minutes basically after they took off. And the reason I know this is because Dwyer said he told Peterson to contact him immediately they took off at 12:55, so at 1 o'clock in the morning he was supposed to contact the tower, the terminal at the airport, and say, look, everything's fine, which he did not do. So Dwyer, of course, panicking, tries to initiate contact with the aircraft and does not get any response. So obviously this big storm comes in and kind of blows in and out. By 9 o'clock the next morning, Dwyer reports it immediately because he's worried. He's worried that he has not heard from them in hours, and it would not have taken him that long to get to North Dakota, Fargo, North Dakota, and he would have definitely made contact with the terminal somewhere, even if he went the wrong direction, because he was like, oh my gosh, this is really bad weather, I'm gonna go this way. But instead, what happened was when the investigators got to the crash site, the little single-engine Beechwood Bonanza had actually hit the embankment with its right wing first at about 170 knots. That is very, very fast. I mean, everybody was dead instantly. It actually did a cartwheel across the cornfield that it hit it at the embankment and just did circles, flinging everybody. The only person that did not get ejected from the aircraft was the pilot, but they were all just immediately dead. And arose, of course, like in anything. There are rumors that a gun or a firearm had gone off, and that's why they crashed. That was when the Big Bopper, his body exhumed in 2005, I think it was, or 5 or 9. Don't quote me on that. That they had a forensic anthropologist re-examine his body, and he just stated what the first coroner said. He said almost every bone in his body was shattered. There's no way, and there was no even trace evidence of any kind of lead that or hole entry point of a gun or any kind of firearm. He just felt that immediately once they exhumed the body, because they actually moved the Big Bopper to a different site. The 4 people were all buried in, separately, individually. Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper were buried in Texas, and Ritchie Valens was buried in California, and of course the pilot Roger Peterson was buried in Iowa. Buddy Holly's wife, who he had just married 6 months prior, was pregnant, and unfortunately there was no protocols in place that prevented the press from alerting the world to the names of the victims and what happened over the airways. Well, because of this, his wife lost the baby. I mean, she was just in such shock. And his mother, she also found out via the news report and collapsed right then and there. So immediately protocol was put into place that did not allow authorities to give any information about the victims to the press until they could, alert the families. For reasons like that, nobody wants to find out that their loved one has been in this horrific, plane crash over the news. That would be terrible. Oh pretty fast. Just what I know from being around planes most of my life, and my dad, and his perspective on him making that left turn at 800 feet, which he was supposed to do, and that's fine, but then that next left turn, which he slowly, the taillights were descending, not ascending, they were going down, which I'm sure Dwyer was in full panic mode at that time, but the storm had come in. I mean, it was really a quick storm that was upon them, and the pilot just didn't have the proper information at his disposal that he should have had to make the decision to not fly that plane. And even the most experienced pilot, that's a lot. I mean, that 30 knots, gusts, wind. I mean, it's a pretty powerful storm coming in. I don't think even, the best pilot in a little plane like that would have made the decision to stay or to go. Would not have tips up, for sure. Grounded. That's what I think. I know my dad would have. Now, I don't think this was an arrogant pilot. I don't think he was. He was 21 years old and he lived and breathed flying. I don't think he would have put anybody's life in jeopardy. That's not the feeling that anybody got. So I'm not putting blame here on the pilot. I don't think he had the proper information to make the appropriate decision to stay on the ground. And the whole theory of, that this went wrong and that went wrong, the National Transportation Safety Board said, you don't really have sufficient evidence that any of this is worth reopening this case, or this investigation. It is what it is. It's, really, it can happen, whether it is, especially back then, and when you're in the middle of winter. I think the bad decision was going at all, knowing that there was even snow flurries. If you're not instrument rated, I think that was a poor decision, period. Many people thought the name of the aircraft was American Pie because of a popular song called American Pie. The day the music died. But that is not the case. That was not the name of the aircraft. It was like N92765N. I don't remember exactly, but it was not American Pie. This 24 days, 24 cities, venue, the winter dance party. Well, they kept going. People just filled in for the ones that had passed away, and I kind of felt that that was really not respectful. I don't think it should have been. I know they would have lost money, but it seemed to be all about money. Buddy Holly having to go on this and signing with this new company, GAC, and him having a new bride, and her being 6 months pregnant, he needed the money. None of these guys, the saddest thing I think is that none of these guys were bad guys. They weren't druggies, they weren't hurting anybody, they were just tired and wanted a few minutes of rest before having to continue on. And I really, honestly, who I blame the most, in my opinion, is whoever was the brilliant genius that put these venues, made them go from city to city in a zigzag motion, 500 miles from the next town. Why they just didn't go in a circle and schedule it like that? Where Ritchie Valens, I know, is not thinking, they're all from the South. They're not thinking, oh gee, it's gonna be negative 38 degrees outside and waist deep snow. Two of them are from Texas and the other one's from California. None of them were from up there. So when this contract was signed, I don't think, the people that signed it, I don't think the singers they were just excited to have a gig at that point, and be able to get their music across. Another thing, Buddy Holly wanted to sign with this company because they had plans of going to Europe or Britain, and he really wanted to go. That's what, his whole goal was. He was going to prove to them that he was capable of doing great things, and he was going to promote their band to the point of where he'd be popular enough to go to Britain in the summer, or that next year, but that doesn't really matter. Just that was his goal, so he was really driving to accomplish this, of making it to Britain. So they are already legends of their time. Unfortunately, their time ended too soon, and it was just a tragic accident that really could have been prevented if the pilot had the right information in front of him instead of the earlier information, because the storm moved fast. Since Dwyer was able to hop in a plane not even 4 or 5 hours later in the morning and find them, you get a tailwind and a gust and you're making a turn like that and you don't know how to read your instruments, it's a problem. And maybe the weight is not distributed properly. So maybe then the wings froze up. I mean, who knows? There's a plethora of things that could have happened. Thank you for joining me. This was a request from one of my subscribers, and actually, it's very interesting. This person has asked me to do a couple interesting cases I would not have thought of doing. Not that they're a true crime, but they were a tragedy. And in some ways, they were a crime because it's a crime that those young, great artists could not have survived when just simple pilot error. I mean, hitting the ground at 170 knots, that is a lot. I mean, that's going fast. I don't even think, like I was saying before, a lot of things could have contributed to this, but it just seemed like it kind of took him by surprise. He wasn't even seeming to slow the plane down to come to a stop and land the plane. So I don't know. This of a gun had gone off, and they were all dispelled. There being anything wrong with the plane, it maybe very well could have been, but the two biggest factors was a factor of the person who actually set up this schedule that was full. I mean, it's just not logical in anybody's mind. I don't know who set that up, but it was almost as if they were trying to set them up for failure, and I blame that, and the fact that the pilot did not get the proper flight plan with the correct weather, what he was about to run into, that he was not qualified to fly in. And that right there is a tragedy in itself. helps me beat the YouTube algorithm. I know it's night and day, the difference it makes.